finish our reading from scriptures here and turn then to our shorter catechism, looking now at questions numbers 59 and 60, which read as follows. Which day of the 7 hath God appointed to be the weekly Sabbath? The answer is, from the beginning of the world to the resurrection of Christ, God appointed the 7th day of the week to be the weekly Sabbath, and the first day of the week ever since, to continue to the end of the world, which is the Christian Sabbath. How is the Sabbath to be sanctified? The answer is, the Sabbath is to be sanctified by a holy resting all that day, even from such worldly employments and recreations as are lawful on other days, and spending the whole time in the public and private exercises of God's worship, except so much as to be taken up in the works of necessity and mercy. Excuse me. One of the interesting things about the Catechism and its discussion of the Sabbath is that it roots the practice of the Sabbath beyond the law of Moses, where many of us might consider it has its place, but goes all the way back to the creation of all things. God worked 6 days, created the heavens and the earth, and then rested on the 7th day, and He blessed the 7th day, made it holy. It became the Sabbath. And so, in observing a Sabbath, we are imitating God. His own activity of 6 days of labor and a day of rest is set up for us as a pattern for us to follow. It's interesting that God rested. God, who is almighty, who never tires, who is ever blessed, nonetheless rested from His work for that day and rejoiced in the work of creation. So the idea of the Sabbath has its roots in the beginning, in the creation account, and therefore the Sabbath is a creation ordinance. It's not something that simply begins under Moses, under the law of the Old Covenant, and regulates national Israel for a period of time, but it's rooted in the very structure of the universe, in the way God created everything. And so just as marriage is rooted in creation and work is rooted in creation, God's plan for us to work, these are creation ordinances, so also the Sabbath day, a day of rest, is set apart by God for us and for our well-being. And this Sabbath then continued on through the ages, through the times of Noah and into the time of Abraham, Jacob, and finally getting to Moses at Mount Sinai. And Moses includes it, of course, in the Ten Commandments. When you look at the form in which God or Moses records the command to keep the Sabbath day holy, you'll note that he roots it again in the creation account, where in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and so forth. And then, going on later, after a wilderness wandering for about 40 years, Moses writes the book of Deuteronomy, and he once more gives us the Ten Commandments. This time, he situates this commandment in a different position. Rather than rooting it in the creation account, he roots it in the work of redemption. It's on this day that they were delivered from their bondage to slavery in Egypt, and God brought them redemption on this day. And so Moses, in these two accounts of the command, roots it in creation and in redemption, or God's work of recreation of His people. And so we are doubly obligated under Moses, if you will, to observe a day of rest. Two separate motivations for keeping this day holy. And so the weekly Sabbath continues on, of course, through Moses. There was the moral law given in the Ten Commandments, but then there were also ceremonial observances that accumulated around the Sabbath. One interesting part about the Sabbath observance in the Mosaic account is that you have times when the Sabbath was not only observed on the 7th day, but also on the 8th day. In other words, the first day of the week. And so there were special times when a first day Sabbath would also be observed, which gives us an intimation that under the Old Covenant there was the provision made for a change at some point. Now, of course, there was also the year of Jubilee, which was a Sabbath, and there was the various Sabbaths that God also provided for His people through the festivals and so forth. But it's clear that there was an indication that a change could be coming on the day of the week in which the Sabbath was to be observed. And so this is the ongoing Old Covenant depiction of the Sabbath, which, being part of the Old Covenant, is something of a shadow and type of that which is yet to come. There's something greater to come even in this command. And if God really did first in creation and then in the deliverance from Egypt, perhaps there was a greater rooting or motivation to come in a greater redemption, that being our salvation from sin and death through Jesus Christ. And so when we come into the New Testament, we have this arrangement under the Old Covenant that has continued on for some period of time, and the natural expectation would be that this continues on into the New Testament unless there's something in the New Testament that disrupts that and says that this practice ought to change. In fact, you have Isaiah speaking about the Sabbath observance and how it was the place where God's blessing would be on His people as they would honor that day. When we come into the New Testament, then you have this ongoing development of redemptive history and Sabbath theology, if you can put it that way. But with the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ, things change. Christ rose on the first day of the week, and redemption is a kind of entrance into Sabbath rest. It's a deliverance from the works of self-righteousness and efforts to merit favor with God under the Old Covenant. And it's a transfer to those who believe in Jesus, where Christ has done the work for us. He has fulfilled the obligations of the law. He has obeyed God perfectly as the second Adam, as the last Adam. And so therefore, when we come to faith in Christ, we believe that He worked for us and set us free from that obligation in terms of our relationship with God and earning His favor. And by faith we enter into His Sabbath rest. The rest of salvation, redemption. And this arrival of the Sabbath rest transforms everything. And so in the New Testament, Paul, yes, indeed, went to the Jewish synagogues on the old seventh-day Sabbath and witnessed to them. But when the disciples were gathered after that, they met on the Lord's Day. Right from the very start, at Pentecost, they are meeting on the Lord's Day, the first day of the week. The Apostle John, in his Revelation at the end of the New Testament, says that he was in the Spirit on the Lord's Day. Clearly, even on the island of Patmos, a place where he was confined and imprisoned, John recognized the sanctity of the Lord's Day, perhaps all by himself. I don't know if there were other Christians around him, maybe there were, but he nonetheless observed a day of rest before the Lord, and he was in the Spirit on the Lord's Day. What an amazing view of the Sabbath, a day when we are in the Spirit. We spoke a couple weeks ago about the body and how we are raised and we are Spirit-qualified bodies, as it were, in that glorious estate. Well, the Sabbath day is a day in which the Spirit comes especially upon His people and ministers to their needs. And so the practice of Sabbath observance continues on into the New Testament period of time, only being transformed to the first day of the week, the Lord's Day. And that points to the salvation that we have in Christ. And out of the resurrection Sabbath day, the Sunday, we then go off into our work week with a different perspective. Not the perspective of works righteousness trying to earn favor with God, but the perspective of those who are redeemed, empowered by the resurrection, and now enabled to work for God and for Christ and for the glory of God through all the avenues of life. The work week is transformed. It is a resurrection-empowered work week. And so we have a new and different experience of life through the resurrection of Christ and the embodiment of the Lord's Day. As I've gone a little bit long, we'll postpone the discussion of the observance of the Sabbath until next time. But there are those who differ with us. The Seventh-day Adventists worship on a Saturday rather than a Sunday. I happen to meet with some one time. I'll tell you about that experience some other time. But the importance of the Christian Sabbath has been observed by the Christian church for centuries. It's the consistent experience of the church that we meet on the first day of the week. And efforts to retain the old covenant Sabbath is to go back in time and to fail to appreciate the significance of Christ's resurrection and the impact that that makes on our observance of this Sabbath day, a day of true spiritual rest, a day of grace and God's favor. We'll finish there for now.